Good evening, students. This is now the evening of Sunday night. We will be beginning our new unit tomorrow on Monday. There was a lot of things in this past unit. It looks like not all of you got to all of them, but we'll make sure that we get to most of the things as we move forward. So I had originally wanted to go from Friday to Friday, but because of the holidays and also because of this mix-up last week with the reading, we gave a little extra time today to get to give you to respond to all the readings, and we'll do the same thing next week. So it'll be Monday to Sunday, the time that the class lesson will go. That'll be lesson 3. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. It's clear from this last lesson and from the previous one that I have thrust you into this world of biblical studies, biblical scholarship without a whole lot of preliminaries. As we move through the material, the preliminaries will become a little more obvious, but one of the things I like to do in this course is to hold office hours through video chat. The platform that I use is Google Plus Hangout, and I'll be sending out information on that. That means real time, and these office hours will meet on Thursdays at 4 p.m. in the afternoon. And many people take advantage of this. We come together. It's an ability to chat about the course individually and as a group. Google Chat allows us all to be there together. So let me make some comments now about each of the discussion areas that we were dealing with this past week. Hopefully they will be helpful to you. The first thing had to do with the two different approaches offered in Kugel to sort of the traditional approach and the modern approach that you find in the writings of Spinoza. And for the purposes of this course, for this particular aspect of the course, we're not going to be using so much of the traditional approaches, but more of the historical critical approach to give you a sense of the early background of Israelite religion and what eventually became Judaism. What that means is we read this material not as traditionalists did, which says this is the word of God sent to us to teach us how to live our lives through laws and stories and so on. But rather, we're looking at this as we would look at a book that was written in ancient times, and try to understand it as best we can using linguistic tools, using literary tools, historical, sociological, anthropological, all of these things to try to understand what this material might have meant at the time in which it was written down and at the time in which it was read in the early days. How do these people understand what the issues were from the creation story itself? What was it really all about? The flood story we talked about. And this next week we'll be looking at the rest of the book of Genesis. But even these early, what is called prehistorical chapters written really before history, what is the nature of these chapters? What is the intent even of the narrators, of the writers? How do we understand the different strands or documents? We talk about the first story of creation and the second story of creation. These aren't in conflict with each other. They are simply two different ways of talking about the beginnings of things. And what are the issues that come up? What's the nature of the human being? What's the nature of this universe? How do we understand what are the responsibilities that have been given to human beings here? The same thing is true with regard to the story of the flood. And I would just say with regard to the Sperling essay, as I wrote at the end there, that I'm really interested in looking at this in the context of other cultures of the ancient Near East, and to ask ourselves the question of what happens if we look at these stories without making any judgment in advance about whether this is superior or inferior. The real point here is this is the Jewish story. This is the Jewish early story of origins, of how we got to be here. All of human beings, but it's the Jewish narrative. The Babylonians have their narrative. The Sumerians have their narrative. And what we have is ours. We want to sort of understand how that works, what it's all about, what the figures are. And the case that I would make is that it doesn't have to be a competition with the nature of the cultures that are around it. Some ways I like some of the things that Noah does. Some ways I like some of the things that Utnapishtim does. I would urge you, in your thinking about this, to go back to the Gilgamesh epic story of the flood and look at what happens when Utnapishtim comes out of the ark, of this ark that he built for the first time, and he looks around. What does he do? Compare that to what Noah does when he comes out of that ark. So that's about the Kugel material. The first 11 chapters and the Jewish Study Bible is of interest because the Jewish Study Bible tries to combine kind of historical, critical, and some traditional interpretation in a more integrated way. It's not entirely written from the historical critical, because if you look at the introduction to the whole thing by Brettler and Berlin, you see that they are really intending this to be used by Jews as part of their religious world, looking at it when the Bible is read in the synagogue and so on, and trying to derive some meaning from it. Now, the introductions to each of the books, however, look like they're pretty much historical critical. The commentaries, however, try to bring some kind of integration. And if you look at Levinson's commentary on Genesis, you'll find that he offers historical critical readings, and he'll offer some medieval interpretations, not as the true reading of it, but as a way the Jews have tried to understand this material over the years. But it's a wonderful resource, this Jewish Study Bible, in one volume. It'd be nice if the Hebrew were there as well, but unfortunately there wasn't enough room for that. So that's what you find in that. In the Carol Myers essay, which represent a kind of feminist way of looking at the Bible, and the Esther Fuchs essay as well, what happens when we have a new strategy, a new way of looking at these texts? What now becomes opened up to us? What is revealed to us as we focus on something we've never focused on before? And Carol Myers helps us to look at different kinds of questions. And once you look at different kinds of questions, then you're going to think about the whole subject matter a little differently. And I'm very struck by the original article by Phyllis Tribble, which did look at this word Adam instead of Adam, which was usually translated, no, God created man, male, the male. But in fact, if we look at it more carefully, we really see that it was a gender-neutral term, Adam, and it's only when God creates the woman out of the rib of this Adam that you got man, who is in contradistinction to woman, and therefore the whole idea of woman being subservient to man, and that piece of it needs to be understood a little bit differently. But throughout all of the readings of the book of Genesis and onward, the question now, as we begin to look at who the women were and what role they played and so on, because of feminist studies, feminist theory, feminist strategies, we now have a whole new way of reading this material. We'll be looking at it through the rest of the Bible too. Finally, in the Sperling essay, I had wanted for you all to look at something that I mentioned as I began to talk about Kugel, and that is Sperling really wants us to take a kind of unbiased, unprejudiced look at the nature of early Israelite religion, early Israelite history, and not always put ourselves into a kind of a competitive frame in the context of other cultures of the ancient Near East. He would say this attempt to show how well we were always, the Babylonian stories are not concerned with morality. The Hebrew stories are concerned with morality. Well, sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. Sometimes the Babylonian stories have more morality. There's a lot of things in there that are different and different from the ancient Near Eastern story, the biblical story, the ancient Near Eastern story, all of these things. And what's important is for us to get a better understanding of our own story, the ancient Near Eastern biblical story while we understand what's going on in other cultures of the ancient Near East. So if there are other flood stories in the ancient Near East, it can help us understand the biblical flood story and the other way around as well, without having to show that our biblical flood story somehow is superior to the others. Now, what is that, the implications for Jewish education, for instance, for education in general? Because oftentimes we think of the educational purpose here is to show how great Judaism is in comparison to other things and so on. And I'm not sure that needs to be the place we need to go. As we try to enter a pluralistic world, do we really need to always be sort of touting our own strengths and so on? And rather, can't we just try to understand the our own traditions, our own culture, whatever is found in this? And I'm saying ours because this is, in a sense, a course which focuses on text and context of early Judaism and rabbinic Judaism. So I'm using those terms this way. So my overall sense about this is that I think you raised a lot of interesting issues throughout your writing, your posting. I did feel a little bad that not so many of you posted on the last 2 or 3 of the questions that were asked. And we're really going to have to do a little better than that. So I said you didn't have to write about everything, but you should try to write about a lot of the stuff that's in there. And it'll make our conversation, it'll make the class a lot more interesting. For this coming week, we're going to be looking at the patriarchal stories from Genesis 12 up through 50. And we're going to be looking at historical approaches, literary approaches, attempts to understand what does it mean to think about these stories. Did they happen? Didn't they happen? How important is it that they happened? Were these real people, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? How could we know if they were real or not? Those are some of the things you'll be reading about in the reading for this coming week. So have a good week, and we'll continue to be in touch through posting, and hopefully on Thursday afternoon. Oh, wait, I can't do it this Thursday. I'm going to cancel that. We're not going to meet this Thursday afternoon. I realize I'm going to be out of town. Sorry about that. I will send it a time. Maybe it'll be on Wednesday as opposed to Thursday. I apologize for that. So not this Thursday, and I'll send something around on that.